You're too old to drive cross-country alone, Mom. What if something happens? Just sell the RV. Sarah's words hung in the kitchen like smoke. My daughter stood by the counter, arms crossed. With that expression, I'd come to know too well the one that said she'd already decided what was best for me. Your mother's right, Mark added, not looking up from his phone. My son-in-law had perfected the art of agreeing without actually participating. It's not safe. You should really think about moving closer to us. This house is too big for one person anyway. I looked down at the keys in my hand. Tom and I had bought that RV 15 years ago, back when retirement felt like a beginning instead of an ending. We'd planned routes across America, marked maps with highlighter, dreamed about small-town diners and mountain sunrises. Then the heart attack came, and all those plans folded up like the maps I'd tucked away in a drawer. That was 3 years ago. I've been driving for 49 years without an accident, I said quietly. That's not the point. Sarah moved to the sink, started rinsing dishes that were already clean. Things are different now. You're alone. What if you get lost? What if the RV breaks down in the middle of nowhere? The middle of nowhere. As if anywhere I wasn't was somehow dangerous. I'd raised 2 children in this house, taught them to ride bikes, nursed them through chickenpox, stayed up countless nights helping with homework and heartbreaks. I'd managed a household, a part-time bookkeeping business from the dining room table, and still found time to volunteer at the library every Tuesday. But now, at 67, I was apparently too fragile to drive myself somewhere I wanted to go. I'm not selling the RV, I said. Sarah turned, her face softening into that patient expression I hated more than anger. Mom, we're just worried about you. Ever since Dad died, you've been so withdrawn. We barely hear from you anymore, because every time I called, I felt like a burden. Every conversation became a wellness check, a subtle interrogation about whether I'd remembered my medication, whether I was eating properly, whether I'd considered moving to that nice assisted living facility 20 minutes from their house. I wasn't old enough for assisted living. I wasn't even old enough for Medicare. But I was, apparently, too old to want something for myself. After they left, I sat in Tom's chair. I still thought of it as his, even though I'd sat in it more times in the past 3 years than he did in the last year of his life. The house felt enormous and empty, the way it always did after Sarah's visits. She meant well. I knew that. But meaning well and seeing clearly weren't always the same thing. I looked at the RV keys on the coffee table. Tom had named it Wanda, after his grandmother who'd once hitchhiked from Chicago to San Francisco in 1952. She was fearless, he'd said when we brought it home. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to be fearless. The next morning, I called the insurance company and updated my policy. Then I went to the bank and withdrew $2,000 in cash, enough for gas, food, and emergencies. I packed methodically. Clothes, toiletries, the good camera Tom had given me for our last anniversary, my old journal, with half the pages still blank. I didn't call Sarah. I didn't leave a note. I just locked the house, climbed into Wanda's driver's seat, and started the engine. The first few hours, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Every merge felt like a test I might fail. Every semi-truck that passed made my heart race. But somewhere around hour 3, when I stopped at a rest area in Pennsylvania and bought terrible coffee from a vending machine, something shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. I was awake. I'd planned to head west with no particular destination, just following the pull of open road. But standing in that rest area parking lot, watching families climb out of minivans and truckers stretch their legs, I remembered something. There was a painting workshop in Asheville, North Carolina, one I'd seen advertised in an art magazine 6 months ago. I'd torn out the page, tucked it into my wallet, then never looked at it again because it seemed indulgent. Something a person with more time and less responsibility might do. But I had time now, didn't I? I dug out the crumpled page. The workshop was 3 days long, starting in 2 days. I called the number, half expecting them to be full, but the woman who answered had a thick mountain accent and said, "Honey, we've got room. You coming alone?" "Yes," I said. And it felt like the first honest thing I'd said in months. "Good for you. See you Wednesday." I made it to Asheville by late afternoon the next day, driving through mountains that seemed to rise up like promises. I'd forgotten how beautiful this part of the country was, all those shades of green, the way clouds hung low in the valleys, the tiny towns with their one stoplight and hand-painted signs advertising fresh honey and homemade jam. I parked Wanda at a campground on the edge of town, set up at a site with electrical hookups, and sat outside watching the sun drop behind the mountains. A woman from the next site over wandered by with a beer in hand. "First time solo?" she asked. I nodded. "Best decision you'll ever make." She raised her beer in salute. "I'm Rita. Been full-timing for 7 years. Divorced my husband, sold everything, bought a rig, and haven't looked back." She was maybe 70, with silver hair cut short and laugh lines deep as canyons. We talked until dark, and she told me about places I'd never heard of. A lavender farm in Oregon, a ghost town in Montana, a beach in Maine where you could find sea glass by the handful. "The thing nobody tells you," Rita said, "is that getting old isn't about shrinking. It's about shedding. All the stuff you thought mattered just top falls away, and what's left is pretty damn good." That night, I slept better than I had in years. The workshop was held in a converted barn on the edge of someone's property, all exposed beams and natural light pouring through skylights. There were 8 of us, mostly women, mostly over 50. The instructor, a man named Ben who couldn't have been more than 40, treated us like serious artists, not hobbyists, killing time. "Forget what you think you know about painting," he said on the first morning. "I'm not here to teach you technique. I'm here to help you remember how to see." We spent hours just looking. At the way light fell across an apple, at the negative space between tree branches, at the exact shade of shadow under someone's chin. And then we painted, and it was terrible, and it didn't matter. I'd taken art classes in college, back when I thought I might be a painter. Then life happened. Marriage, children, mortgages, all those beautiful responsibilities that somehow made painting seem frivolous. I'd told myself I'd come back to it someday. But someday became never. And eventually, I stopped even thinking about it. On the second day, Ben asked us to paint something we'd lost. I painted Tom's hands. Not the way they looked at the end, swollen and slow, but the way I remembered them from our early years, strong and sure, always reaching for me. When I finished, I cried in front of 7 strangers, and none of them looked away or told me it was okay. They just let me feel it. That's when Sarah called. I'd texted her when I arrived in Asheville, not because I wanted to check in, but because I knew she'd panic if she showed up at the house and I wasn't there. The text was brief. "Took a trip. Will call soon." But apparently soon wasn't soon enough. "Mom, where are you? What do you mean you took a trip? We've been worried sick." I stepped outside the barn, watching clouds roll across the mountains. "I'm in North Carolina." "North Carolina? You drove to North Carolina?" 11. Actually, I stopped for lunch. Silence. Then, "This isn't funny. You can't just take off without telling anyone. What if something had happened? What if the RV broke down?" It didn't, but it could have. You could have been stranded somewhere with no cell service, and we wouldn't have any idea where to look for you. I thought about telling her the truth, that I'd felt more stranded in my own kitchen than I'd felt in 300 miles of highway. That being alone in the mountains with strangers felt less lonely than sitting in a house full of memories while she reminded me of all the things I supposedly couldn't do anymore. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "I'm fine, Sarah. I'm taking an art workshop. An art. Mom, are you having some kind of crisis? Maybe I was. Or maybe I was just waking up. I'll call you when I'm heading home, I said, and ended the call before she could argue. Ben found me after class, asked if I was okay. I told him about Sarah, about the too old to drive conversation, about how I'd spent 3 years shrinking into a shape my daughter could manage. My mom did that, he said. After my dad died, she made herself small, stopped traveling, stopped painting. She was an artist, too. Stopped doing anything that might inconvenience us kids. Then one day, she just wasn't there anymore. Physically, yeah, but not really. He paused. She died 2 years later. And I kept thinking, what if she'd told us all to back off? What if she'd just lived? I thought about that for a long time. On the last day of the workshop, we had a small show. Everyone's paintings hung on the barn walls, and we invited locals from town. A woman about my age stood in front of my painting of Tom's hands for 10 minutes, then found me in the crowd. My husband died last year, she said. And this is exactly how I remember his hands, too. We stood there together, two widows looking at a painting of hands that no longer existed, except in memory and pigment. And it felt like the most honest conversation I'd had in months. I stayed in Asheville for another week after the workshop ended. I painted in the mornings, explored the town in the afternoons, had dinner with Rita and a few other RVers at the campground. We cooked over portable grills, shared stories, made plans to meet up in other places down the road. One night, Rita asked, "What are you running from?" "I'm not running from anything," I said automatically. She just looked at me. "Okay," I admitted. "Maybe I'm running from being invisible, from being mom and nothing else. From everyone deciding what I can and can't do." "Good," Rita said. "Run as far as you need to. And maybe you'll figure out you're not running from anything, you're running toward yourself." I stayed away for 6 weeks total. I drove through the Smoky Mountains, stopped at every scenic overlook, took 1,000 mediocre photographs and 3 good ones. I went to Savannah and painted Spanish moss dripping from oak trees. I drove up to the Outer Banks and watched wild horses on the beach at dawn. I ate at diners where the waitresses called me honey, and the coffee tasted like it had been sitting since yesterday, and it was all exactly what I needed. I started a blog because Rita convinced me I should. I called it Wanda's Wanderings and posted photos of paintings, RV parks, sunrises. I didn't expect anyone to read it, except maybe Rita, but people found it somehow. Other women my age, some older, some younger, all feeling that same pull towards something they'd set down years ago. The comments made me cry more than once. I'm 71, and my kids told me I'm too old to move to Florida alone. But you're inspiring me to do it anyway. My husband died 5 years ago, and I haven't left the house except for groceries. But reading your blog makes me think maybe I could. Thank you for showing us that our lives aren't over, that we're still whole people. Sarah called every few days, her tone moving from worried to frustrated to something else I couldn't quite name. Each time, I told her where I was, what I was doing. Each time, she reminded me I could come home anytime. Each time, I said I knew. I finally turned toward home on a Wednesday morning in late September. The leaves were starting to change, painting the mountains in shades of fire. I took my time, stopped when I wanted to, stayed places an extra day if they felt right. When I pulled into my driveway, I'd been gone 43 days. Sarah's car was already there. She met me on the porch, and for a moment, I thought there would be a fight. But instead, she just looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time in years, and said, "You look different." "I feel different," I said. We went inside, and I made coffee while she walked through the house like she was seeing it for the first time. She stopped at the dining room table where I'd laid out a dozen small paintings, all from the trip. "You did these?" "Most of them." She picked up the one of Tom's hands, studied it. I forgot you used to paint. So did I. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd told me I was too old to drive alone. And she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. I was scared," she continued. "After Dad died, I kept thinking something would happen to you too. Every time you mentioned doing something alone, I panicked. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just trying to control something I can't control." "I know," I said. "But Sarah, I can't live my life trying to keep you from being scared. That's not fair to either of us." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "There were 3,000 people following you by the time I figured it out. 3,000. I'd stopped checking after the first week. The comments," Sarah said quietly. "All those women talking about feeling invisible, about their kids treating them like they're fragile. Mom, was I making you feel like that?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I let you. I think I was scared too. Scared of being alone. Scared of proving you right. Scared of wanting things that seemed selfish. Driving across the country to paint isn't selfish." We talked for hours. Really talked. The way we hadn't since she was young, and we'd stay up late discussing everything and nothing. She told me about her own fears about aging, about losing me, about whether she was a good enough mother to her own kids. I told her about the workshop, about Rita, about standing on a beach in North Carolina and feeling more alive than I'd felt in years. "I'm not coming back the same way I left," I said. "I can't." "I don't want you to," Sarah said. "I want you to keep driving, keep painting, keep doing whatever makes you feel like yourself, even if it scares me, especially if it scares me." That winter, I drove to Arizona. I painted deserts and cacti and sunsets that looked like the earth was on fire. Sarah asked if she could visit for a week, and I said yes, and we hiked trails. I would have been too old for 6 months earlier. She took pictures of me standing at the edge of canyons, wind in my hair, smiling wider than I had in years. "This is my mom," she posted on social media. 67, and living her best life. Goals. The blog grew. Women started meeting me at campgrounds, bringing their own paintings, their own stories of late-blooming courage. We called ourselves the Wandering Women, and it became a thing, not a business, just a loose network of women who'd decided they weren't done yet. Who'd decided that getting older meant shedding the weight of other people's expectations, not shrinking to fit them. Rita and I met up in New Mexico that spring. We painted together, ate chile that burned our mouths, talked about Tom and her ex-husband, and all the versions of ourselves we'd been before this one. "You know what the best part is?" Rita asked one night, both of us sitting outside our RVs watching stars multiply across the sky. "What?" "Knowing that we chose this. Not running away, not proving a point. Just choosing ourselves for once." I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. About choice and agency, and how easy it was to give those things away in small increments until you woke up one day and didn't recognize the shape of your own life. I'm 68 now. Wanda's odometer has turned over twice. My blog has 12,000 followers. Sarah and I talk every week, and she's stopped asking when I'm coming home, because she understands now I am home. In the driver's seat, on the road, painting small moments in cheap motels and expensive campgrounds and everywhere in between. Sometimes people ask if I'm lonely. I tell them I've never been less lonely in my life. That loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about being unseen. And I finally see myself clearly. Last month, a woman in her 70s stopped me at an RV park in Colorado. She'd been following the blog, she said. Her children thought she was too old to travel alone. She was thinking about doing it anyway. "Is it worth it?" she asked. I thought about Sarah's face that first day I came home. About how our relationship had to break a little before it could rebuild into something more honest. About all the sunrises I would have missed, all the paintings I wouldn't have made, All the women I'd never have met if I'd stayed small and safe and manageable. Yes, I said. It's worth it. She bought an RV 3 weeks later. I got a text with a photo of her standing next to it, grinning, giving a thumbs up. The license plate read, "Never too old." I laughed until I cried. Because she's right. We're never too old. Too old to drive. Too old to start something new. Too old to choose ourselves. None of it's true. It's just a story we tell to make the shrinking feel acceptable, to make invisibility feel like wisdom instead of surrender. I'm driving north now, toward Canada. I've never been, and I want to paint the northern lights. Sarah asked if I'm sure I can handle the border crossing, the international driving, the unfamiliar roads. I told her I'd figure it out, because that's what I do now. I figure things out. I make mistakes and take wrong turns and occasionally end up somewhere I didn't plan to be. And it's all exactly what I needed 3 years ago when I was sitting in a too-big house, shrinking into a shape that fit everyone's comfort except my own. This morning, I pulled into a rest stop in Montana. There was another RV parked nearby, and an older woman was outside painting at an easel. She looked up when I passed, smiled. "First trip?" she asked. "No," I said. "But every trip feels like the first one." She nodded, like she understood exactly what I meant. And I realized I'm not the only one. We're everywhere women who decided too old wasn't a diagnosis, just an opinion. Women who bought RVs and plane tickets and art supplies and hiking boots. Women who stopped asking permission and started asking themselves what they actually wanted. We're the ones you see at campgrounds and scenic overlooks, at museums and diners and trailheads. We're traveling alone, painting alone, hiking alone, except we're not really alone anymore, because we found each other. We're the ones who got tired of being invisible, so we made ourselves impossible to miss.